Please be seated. So I know I've told this to somebody in this room, but have the rest of you heard the one about the guy who gets to the pearly gates and St. Peter says, "Come on in, let me show you around the place." And they go walking along a golden street for a ways, and suddenly they come upon this pit that's filled with people who are wailing and writhing in pain. And the guy says, "Hey, Peter, what's this all about? I thought this was the good place." St. Peter says, "Well, it is. Those are just the Baptists who danced." They walk on a little bit further and come across another pit. Same writhing, some gnashing of teeth and all that. The guy says, "Good grief, there's another one, Peter. What's this all about?" And Peter says, "Well, those are the Catholics who ate meat on Fridays." So they keep walking, and since this is a joke, there is a third pit with yet more people in torment like the others. And the guy says, "Wow, another one. What happened to these people? Who are they?" St. Peter says, "Well, those are the Episcopalians who ate their desserts with their salad forks." I remembered that joke a week ago when I attended my first SEEP conference. SEEP stands for the Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes, which does kind of sound like a group who might care which fork you use, if you know what I mean. And actually, it's either the consortium or the consortium of endowed Episcopal parishes. I'm not quite sure because I heard people say it both ways who really looked like they should know. I mean, they had microphones. They were on the soft furniture up on the dais. But the conflicting pronunciations make it really hard for, posers like me who are just stumbling through this life trying not to embarrass ourselves very often. I was worried because, let's face it, Episcopalians are already known for taking this perverse pleasure in arcane pronunciations and using strange words, right? Somebody dressed like me can stand up in church and with a perfectly straight face say something like, "The vestry will be meeting in the narthex after Eucharist today to discuss the addition of docils to the reredos," as if any speaker of English should know what that means. And honestly, the worst consequences of not having any idea what that sentence means are probably limited to being stumped in a very churchy crossword one day. But some think Episcopalians are people who believe the abundant life of Jesus is really about using weird terms for ordinary things and knowing the proper fork with which to eat one's tomato aspic. Well, I propose that all of this has something to do with a very basic human love of scarcity. We probably don't think of scarcity in terms of knowledge or manners, but think about it a little more. You learned in basic economics that price goes up as supply goes down, assuming that demand remains the same, right? Or vice versa. If you print more dollars or make more widgets, each one of them becomes worth less if everything else is equal. Scarcity determines value. Well, the same goes for knowledge. It makes me feel important to know things that not very many other people know, even when they don't really matter. It makes us feel better to know better, doesn't it? But Jesus echoed so many prophets before him in telling us, beware. Don't let economic valuations make their way into places where they don't belong. Beware, because they tend to seep into everything, even into your most sacred relationships, if you let them. The Passover was near, we're told, when Jesus went up to Jerusalem in John 2. The Passover, this defining event in the history of the Jews, the holiest moment in their year. My favorite passage about how foundational the Passover was to Jesus' people comes from Deuteronomy 6, which says, "When your children ask you in the time to come, what is the meaning of the decrees and the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord our God has commanded you?" In other words, when your kids ask, "So what is this religion thing all about, Mom?" say this: "We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand." The whole of Israel's common life, according to Torah, made sense only through Passover, through the remembered experience of this divine gift of liberation. And so that whole strange system of law and sacrifice, which is strange to us, especially all these years later, all that law was about being formed by the Passover experience year after year after year over time. Sacrifices happened almost everywhere in the ancient world. They were usually seen as ways to appease the gods or to buy their favor. But something was shifting as the Hebrews were freed from Pharaoh's empire and were told to live from that day on out of the experience of this divine gift of deliverance. Unfortunately, life has this way of slipping back into the economic values of supply and demand, if we let it, doesn't it? The practices of letting go of some of what we have, a couple of doves maybe, or the first fruits of our harvest, all those practices were meant to remind us that we live by the gift of the earth's fruitfulness and the gift of our very lives from God. They were meant to shape us in ways of gratitude and generosity. But we humans have this tendency to keep returning to the odd comforts of scarcity. Economic values seep into places where they don't belong. Something in us wants to earn our value before God. We don't want our value to be based on a gift given to everyone. We want it to go up with each sacrifice we make or each good work we perform. We want credit. We want to prove we're worthy, or at least prove we're a little more worthy than the less devout, the less righteous, the less whatever your idea of goodness might be. But according to Jesus and the biblical tradition that preceded him, our value as human beings is not relative. It is not earned. It is a gift given to each of us by God. And anything in our lives that denies that there is an incalculable worth at the center of every human being is directly opposed to the values of God. And so when Jesus sees a marketplace set up in the temple, everything is perfectly wrong about this scene. When he sees people making a profit, exchanging currencies to pay the temple tax, when he sees people raising the prices for the cattle and the sheep and the doves that they are selling to pilgrims, because, let's face it, demand goes up come Passover, he flies into this famous rage. He drives out the sheep and the cattle with the whip he's made. He pours out the money changers' coins on the ground. He turns over the tables. This is arguably the biggest scene Jesus ever makes in his ministry. Clearly, some violation here goes very, very deep. Because Passover was meant to teach us how to live out of a liberating gift. For Passover, of all things, to become a marketplace was its perfect perversion. And what I wonder is whether this is a violation of values that you and I would feel. Is it one I can understand? Can we even access that part of ourselves that really does know that when economic values make their way into sacred places where they do not belong, it is wrong? Well, let's see if a Ford Pinto can take us there. Our next-door neighbors, the Rubles, had one back in the mid-1970s. Since our family drove an old AMC Hornet wagon, the Rubles' new Pinto looked unbelievably elegant and sleek, at least to one 7-year-old boy. So it was hard to believe that a car so beautifully engineered had this unfortunate tendency to explode in rear-end collisions. Maybe you heard about that. What you might not have heard was that the defect in the gas tank design was well known to Ford's engineers. The most expensive fix would have cost $11 per car. But Ford actually went to the trouble of running a cost-benefit analysis for this repair. It was based on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's valuation of a traffic fatality at $200,725 in 1971. That number included things like loss of future productivity, medical costs, property damage, legal fees. There was $10,000 in there for pain and suffering. So Ford used $200,725 as the value of a human life, and they ran the numbers. The company estimated that if they didn't fix the gas tanks, 180 people would die, 180 would be injured, 2,100 vehicles would be damaged. The value of those lost lives and injuries and damaged property would be $49.5 million. But to make an $11 upgrade to 12.5 million vehicles would cost $137 million. So there you have it. The math is clear. Ford saved the $11, and a lot of people died. And we actually don't need actuaries or ethicists to tell us this feels wrong. We know in our bones that the value of a human life can't quite be reduced to dollars. Doesn't a story like this make you want to turn over a few tables, pour out some coins, maybe pick up a whip and disrupt things a bit? But I don't really know exactly how to apply the story of Jesus and the money changers to your life and mine. But I do know that the force of it surely still needs to stir us up in the deepest of ways. This mattered to Jesus. He was not known for knocking things over and swinging whips around, was he? And if market values tend to make their way into places where they don't belong, that doesn't mean that the values of Jesus shouldn't make a difference to how we act out in the market. If the most essential value of a human life to God is a gift, not something that is earned or established by scarcity, what does that say to a world in which the discrepancy between rich and poor grows and grows and grows to be absurd by any reasonable measure? What does it say about wages or about what makes a person worthy to have a warm place to sleep and enough to eat? Do our strictly economic calculations, do scarcity and the workings of supply and demand really do full justice to the truth that every human being really is a bearer of the image of God? My hunch is also that Jesus' outrage ought to turn over tables in many, many other aspects of my life as well. Because every time I live as though my knowledge or my talent or good breeding or power to influence the world are things that distinguish me from other people, rather than gifts from God that can connect me to others as I give them away, I deny the essential giftedness of all our lives once again. But maybe it doesn't have to take another Pinto explosion or another Jesus explosion to remind us and to reorient us. Because have you ever just sat with someone in the last few moments of their life? Those moments with their ability to do anything at all productive slips gradually away from them, but something of their beautiful essence remains? Or have you ever loved someone who was limited physically or emotionally in what they could ever accomplish in this world? Hasn't there been at least some moment in your life when someone who wasn't worth much of anything to the market, but whom you loved with what felt like an infinite love? Have you seen the gift of worth in a person that has nothing at all to do with what she could do? I know you have. And what I wonder is whether Jesus was the one who saw the world this way all the time. The one who saw that sacredness is not scarce at all, but everywhere and in each one of us. The one who never stopped seeing that deep, God-given gift of each life, even yours. And as a result, he loved us far too intensely not to turn over our false and foolish ways of valuing one another and drive them out of our lives with a whip made of cords. What I really wonder is what it might look like if we, as Jesus' people, learned what it might mean to love this world that fiercely today. Amen.